So now let's start to look at these periods in separation. So let's start with the preparation period. Again, remember, high volume, lower intensity, not really low, but lower intensity compared to what you have in the competition period. So what's going on? Well, the primary focus across this is what we call development, particularly if we're thinking about endurance. So it might be what we call base training, that's why in the pyramid you have aerobic base, but you also may want to focus on some of the technical and tactical components of that specific sport. If we've got a monocycle plan, so that's a single competition-based plan, the preparation phase is normally 3 to 6 months, very much dictated then by the length of the competition phase. Does depend on the sport, does depend on the needs of the athlete, but it's normally designed to be twice as long as the competition phase. Now remember that sitting within that, you've then got the general preparatory phase and the specific preparatory. So if we look at the general preparatory phase, in endurance sports, 70 to 80% of the total volume should be devoted to development of aerobic base, and it will be done in that general phase. This is where you're moving from kind of getting the athlete fit enough to train to actually doing specific based training. In the more strength-based sports, in this general phase, you would be focusing on training just to develop strength, to get the strength back up, and starting to move towards the end of the phase to max strength. One of the things that we know, though, is if we devote insufficient volume in this phase of training, it actually seems to have a manifestation in poorer performance in the competition phase. So although the general phase is actually the shortest phase of training in the whole annual plan, its ramifications, particularly in the less experienced athlete, are quite significant when it comes to the competition period. So the general phase normally constitutes no more than a third of the total duration of the overall preparatory period. So maybe 1 to 2 months worth of training. If we then go into the specific preparatory phase, again, thinking about it in terms of if we've used 1 to 2 months up or 1 to 3 months up, this is probably between 2 and 4 months, depending on the structure of the plan. Now what you can do is you can start to increase the training load. And what we're doing is, as we move through this phase, we're starting to bring the volume down and the intensity up. Not suddenly, it's a gradual decline, but really what starts to happen is you'll start to get to the point where, as we move through this phase, the predominance of the load is being governed by intensity as we get to the end of this phase, rather than at the start of this phase when the majority of the load is governed by training volume. So that has to be taken into account, and you have to have an athlete who is fit enough to transition from kind of high volume to higher intensities of training. So if we think about what's going on, the majority of the training is in endurance athletes is kind of aerobic base. It's not up here. It's not to say we won't do some of this in the preparatory phase, but there'll be minimal amounts of this. As we move through from general prep into specific prep, we will start to, remember, increase the intensity. So we might do more intense training in aerobic base, but it allows us to bring in more interval-based training as we start to then move into that competition period of training.